In a world where adventurers stake their lives on the blades they carry, one blacksmith walked away from the pressure of an S-rank guild. Exhausted by endless demands and forbidden from forging the weapons he loved most, he chose freedom over fame. Now, in a quiet frontier village, he begins a new life, devoted only to his craft. What starts as a simple dream of making katanas soon leads to something greater. The birth of a blade whispered to be a legendary demon sword. The story began at the S-rank guild Wings of Glory. The blacksmith Sig expressed his concern, saying that the production volume had become too much to handle, and asking the guildmaster to reconsider the number of requests. The guildmaster dismissed his words, questioning what kind of spoiled complaint he was making. He reminded Sig that adventurers risk their lives against monsters, while blacksmiths only forged tools in safety, and ordered him to finish the work. Blacksmith Sig thought to himself that it was always like this. Even while working at the expense of sleep, the guildmaster still called blacksmiths spoiled. The S-rank guild Wings of Glory had its own blacksmith workshop. In addition to producing weapons for guild members, the workshop also accepted requests from outside. However, the guildmaster, Schmidt, continued to take on an unreasonable number of orders, imposing excessive quotas on the blacksmiths. Blacksmith Sig thought that everyone must have voiced their limits by now, yet the guildmaster never listened. He gave his reply saying he understood, though in his mind he accepted it only because it was the employer's order. With that, he added that he would manage the month's production somehow, but in exchange asked for permission to forge a katana. The guildmaster recalled that Sig had wanted to make a katana. Sig confirmed it, explaining that he had made a contract with the previous guildmaster, under the condition that he would be allowed to forge katanas using the guild's materials. The current guildmaster dismissed the idea, questioning the point of creating such an unpopular, thin, and fragile weapon. Sig defended his stance, insisting that a katana was meant to suit its wielder. The guildmaster cut him off, telling him there was no reason to bother, and that blacksmiths should only produce what was written on the request forms. To him, trying to master a minor weapon was nothing but a useless dream. Sig questioned in his mind if it was truly a useless dream. He then asked if the guildmaster was absolutely refusing to let him forge a katana. The guildmaster called him persistent, annoyingly so. Sig reflected on how he had been devoted all this time, yet had finally reached his limit. He declared that he would be leaving the guild as of that day. The guildmaster shouted in anger, reminding him that this was an S-rank guild, and questioning his sanity. Sig answered that it was the guildmaster who had broken the contract first. The guildmaster dismissed him coldly, saying there were plenty of others to take his place and warning him not to come crying back later. With nothing more to say, Sig left. Sig returned to his room, thinking how petty life had become, with no room to breathe. His body would have given out eventually anyway. He decided to pack everything into his magic bag first. Once finished, he told himself it was time to head to the workshop. Sig arrived at the guild workshop and watched his co-workers at their stations. In his thoughts, he wished he could say goodbye to everyone, but most of the blacksmiths were away on a large-scale expedition. Torque had noticed him, and remarked with surprise that it was rare to see him carrying weapons and tools, asking if he was going on a business trip. Sig answered with an apology, telling him he had decided to quit the guild that day. Shocked, Torque exclaimed at the news, pointing out that the quotas were already insane and questioning what would happen if Sig left. Sig replied that apparently there were plenty of others to replace him. Torque protested, insisting that it was only because Sig had always been covering for everyone that they had managed at all, and reminded him about Ms. Kaide's weapon. Since Sig was the only one capable of forging it, Sig mentioned Kaide's katana, and in his thoughts admitted she had been the only one in the guild who truly appreciated their craftsmanship. Sig told Torque that he wanted him to maintain the weapon. Torque protested, saying it was impossible since Kaide would never let anyone else touch her katana, and he would get sliced up for trying. Sig only smiled and asked him again with a quiet plea. Torque pressed him for more, but Sig simply said that none of them needed to push themselves beyond their limits, and asked him to pass that message on to the others. With those words, Sig turned and left. Sig thought about how he had quit on impulse, uncertain of what to do next. He wondered if he should try to get hired by another guild, or if he should work toward obtaining a license to open his own workshop. He had devoted himself to the guild all this time, yet the end had come so abruptly. A man was grilling skewers when Sig approached and ordered rocks and bird thighs. The man agreed, then recognized him and asked what he was doing out at that hour. A girl holding a knife asked if he knew him. The man explained that Sig was a skilled blacksmith, the very one who had sharpened the knife she was using. The girl remarked how easy it was to cut with. Sig replied that it was good as it was still his work. The man handed Sig his order and told him to savor it when he ate. Sig thanked him. Sig sat on the fountain and ate his skewers, pleased that the meat juices remained because the fibers had not been crushed when cut. Suddenly a shout rang out, warning everyone of danger. He turned and saw a man swinging a sword wildly. Sig wondered if the man was drunk, and thought that if trouble broke out in such a conspicuous place, someone would step in soon. A girl from the Night Order rushed forward, calling for the path to be cleared. She ordered the adventurer to drop his weapon immediately, warning that she would cut him down if he resisted. The man swung his sword at the girl, shouting if she was looking down on him too. She blocked the attack with her own sword. Sig thought that she looked skilled but not used to real combat, and she was being pushed back by the man's pressure. The fight continued. Sig thought about the unpleasant sound, noticing that the man was using the long sword like a blunt weapon instead of a cutting tool. The weight and thickness were all wrong, and against an opponent like that, staying on defense would only break the sword. Just as he expected, the girl's sword snapped under the man's attack. She was shocked, staring at the broken blade, and said it was the proud sword of the Scarlet family. She dropped to the ground while the man glared at her in anger. Sig rushed toward the girl. From the skewer stand, the lady shouted in surprise when she saw him, asking why a blacksmith was stepping in and insisting he had to be stopped. But the man beside her told her there was no need, saying Sig would be fine. The man glared at him and asked who he was. Sig shouted out Sigazia Artsu. His sword opened slightly as his stance shifted, one foot ready to dash forward. In the next instant, the man's sword shattered. Both the man and the lady were stunned. The crowd watching gasped, questioning what kind of sword it was and pointing out the thin blade. The lady at the skewer stand cried out in disbelief, shouting that it had cut straight through a long sword. Sig told the girl it looked like she was shaken, and she answered with a nervous, yes. He then turned to the adventurer and warned that if he caused trouble again, he would cut him down. The man let out a groan as knights arrived, ordering their men to restrain him. Sig muttered that he should learn to drink in moderation, then checked his sword, relieved to see it was undamaged. The girl spoke up, thanking him for saving her. She introduced herself as Saya Scarlet of the Lusarka Third Night Order, and asked for the name of her savior. Sig replied that he hadn't done anything special, and wished her luck with her work. Saya quickly stopped him, asking him to wait, saying she hadn't thanked him properly yet and still had questions. The girl at the skewer stand said it was just as the shop owner had told her. Saya turned to her, asking if she knew that person, wondering who he really was. To cut a sword in half with a single stroke seemed unbelievable. The man explained that Sig was a blacksmith, certainly skilled, but what they had just witnessed was because of his sword. That was what made it amazing. Meanwhile, in the workshop, one of the men asked Torque what exactly made Sig so great. He wondered if it was just because of Sig's love for katanas, pointing out that not many people even use them, and questioned if it wouldn't be fine to just recruit someone else. Torque shook his head, telling him he was too clueless about Sig. Even if the man was new, he should know that Sig often handled external requests all on his own, and he never talked much about himself. Torque explained that Sig really paid attention to the people who would use his creations. It wasn't only about katanas or weapons. When Sig made something, whether it was a kitchen knife or even a pair of scissors, it became a lifelong partner for its user. For Sig, blacksmithing meant connecting with the person who would use the item. Sig walked while looking at his sword. He thought about how this model was one of a kind, made just for him. As someone who forged katanas, it was only natural that he could use one effectively. It had been a while since he last swung a katana. He reflected that katanas might be niche and fragile against impact, but depending on the user and the blade, They could even cut through a longsword. More than anything, a carefully honed katana was beautiful for the sake of its wielder. Sig admitted to himself that he truly loved katanas and wanted to live by forging them, just like he once did in the past. Sig recalled his father's teachings about forging. A katana should be imagined in the hands of its future wielder, measured by their strength, their reach, and the way they would swing it. Each blade was meant to become a tool that brought out the very best in its user. Sig thought about it deeply. He wanted to forge a katana that would surpass even his father's, and to do it in that place with the skills he had now. It was just a small village, but the water was clean. A mine nearby provided materials, and the people lived in peace. There were no guild rules or customs to hold him back. With resolve in his voice, Sig said that he could still do this, and decided to go home. The carriage driver said they had arrived. After departing from the trade city of Lusarka and traveling by horse-drawn carriage for a month, Sig finally arrived at his hometown, Fula village, where he was born and raised. Sig stretched and commented on how fresh and delicious the air felt before heading to the house of village chief Barris. When the door opened, Barris appeared and asked who he might be. Sig introduced himself, saying it had been a long time. Barris looked at him closely and remarked in surprise that Sig had grown so much he could hardly recognize him. They moved to the dining room, where Barris raised his voice in shock upon hearing that Sig had quit. The words even made it two women by the window pause in place. Barris pressed for answers, and Sig explained that the guild's policy never suited him. No matter how many requests he completed, they only piled on more. On top of that, they wouldn't allow him to forge katanas. His goal was to create blades that could surpass his father's, so he decided he would forge his masterpiece in the village instead. Barris cautioned that Fula was countryside, and questioned whether there would be enough people to appreciate his work. Sig replied that he was aware, but simply wanted to focus on blacksmithing as he liked. If he could make a living from that alone, it was enough. Barris acknowledged how much Sig resembled his father, and reminded him that his family home and workshop were still standing. He asked if Sig wanted to move back in, and Sig agreed. Barris mentioned that the village blacksmith was getting old. Sig then asked if he could take on the role himself. Barris responded with excitement, saying everyone would be thrilled to have a blacksmith who once worked for an S-rank guild, and assured him to leave it to him. Sig explained that he could forge not only blades like scissors and sickles, but also farming tools such as hatchets and hoes. Barris smiled, noting how the Sig who once could only sharpen tools had now become truly reliable. Embarrassed, Sig asked him not to bring that up. In the woods, Sig stopped in front of the old workshop and muttered that it was still standing. He stepped inside and found the place dirty and messy. Looking around, he noticed his father's katana was missing, though it would have been dangerous if left unattended. Even so, the smell of iron and charcoal felt nostalgic. He took a deep breath but suddenly stopped, coughing as he hurried to open the window. The air was heavy, and he said to himself that the place needed ventilation. His eyes moved toward the living space where the furniture remained unchanged. He remembered liking it even back then, as well as the times he had been scolded there. Wiping the dirt away, he noticed how easily it came off. With a garbage bag in hand, he decided to take the trash outside for now. As he stepped out, he spotted two girls nearby. They looked similar, almost like sisters, and seemed cautious of him. Sig greeted them, introducing himself as someone who had returned after 15 years, explaining that he had permission from village chief Barris. The sisters held each other's hand and explained that they had seen him earlier at the village chief's house, so they came to greet him. Sig nodded in understanding. The older girl introduced herself as Liliana and then gestured to the younger one, saying her name was Atra. They explained that they spent their days farming and hunting nearby. Sig remarked that farming and hunting were impressive skills for someone so young. Liliana explained that she mostly worked the farm with her mother and was still learning about hunting. Sig nodded at her words, his gaze thoughtful as he repeated the word hunting to himself. Liliana glanced at the workshop and noted that the cleaning looked like a lot of work, offering to help. Sig was caught off guard, surprised by her kindness, and asked if it was really all right for her to do so. Liliana assured him it was fine, explaining that it was their day off. Hearing that, Sig accepted her offer and asked if it was okay for him to rely on her help. The two sisters put handkerchiefs over their mouths and started cleaning the room. Atra looked around in surprise and asked what kind of magic it was. Sig explained that it was just a magic circle that gathered dust. Liliana glanced at him and asked if it wasn't heavy, offering to help. Sig answered that he could manage on his own. The two sisters then remarked together, wondering if Mr. Sig was really that amazing. When the cleaning was finished, all of them raised their hands in joy and shouted that they were done. Sig thanked the two sisters, saying their help had made a big difference. As gratitude for the cleaning, he offered to make something good for them. He explained that he was a blacksmith. Liliana mentioned that the village chief had told them he was an amazing blacksmith. Atra then turned to her sister and asked what a blacksmith was. To answer, Sig showed them a katana, warning that if it was drawn, it should only be opened slightly because it was dangerous. Atra carefully held it and marveled at its beauty. Sig went on to say that he could make various other tools as well and asked if there was anything they needed for their chores. Liliana thought for a moment, then asked if he could make kitchen knives. Sig assured her that he could. Liliana said she wanted a kitchen knife. To her surprise, Atra suddenly declared that she also wanted one. Liliana turned to her in shock, calling her name. Atra explained that she wanted to help her sister in the kitchen. Sig nodded and said it was admirable, noting how Liliana mentioned her sister often struggled with using a knife. He asked if that was so, and Liliana confirmed it, explaining that the ones they had at home were meant for adults, which made them difficult to handle. Sig agreed, remarking that it would indeed be hard to apply force that way. Even so, Liliana hesitated, saying a kitchen knife might be too difficult for Atra. Atra looked up and asked if it wasn't allowed. Sig laughed lightly and told her that Liliana's care for her sister was admirable, reassuring them it was no problem. Liliana insisted that surely 2 knives would be too much, but Sig told her to think of it as a housewarming gift. He promised to make them the next day and deliver them once finished, asking if that was all right. Liliana bowed politely and thanked him, with Atra echoing her gratitude. The two sisters then ran back toward the woods. It was evening, and Sig was worn out from moving and cleaning. Since it was already dark, he decided to rest, but he prepared some tools a bit more. Without realizing it, he had begun preparing unconsciously. His body was exhausted from not sleeping properly for days, yet being here reminded him how fun creating had been in the past. Unable to fight his own nature, he decided to use the materials he had brought. Every blacksmith had their own approach, and Sig incorporated magic to improve efficiency in blacksmithing. Some craftsmen disliked that method, but at the guild it had been essential. With time always short, his skills improved far beyond what they had been at the beginning. The heat reached about 800 degrees as Sig worked, welding steel to the base metal. He used borax, iron oxide, and other materials on the heated surface, attaching the steel, heating it again, and hammering it to fuse the materials together. Once the base metal and steel were fully bonded, he stretched the metal into the shape of a knife. He quenched the knife-shaped piece in water and smiled. Doing what he loved without being bound by time felt freeing. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with his hand, then held the metal and placed it back into the furnace. It was a sight he had seen many times, yet he never grew tired of it. If anything, the more he saw it, the more captivated he became. At last, the knife was finished. Testing it, he held a piece of fruit and sliced through it. But the blade was far too sharp. It cut straight through the fruit and even bit deep into the corner of the wooden table beneath it. Sig froze in shock. He had messed up. Completely absorbed, he had let fatigue and excitement carry him away, and the result was dangerous. It was too risky to give this knife as it was. He needed to work calmly. He thought of Atra. She seemed stronger than others her age, but above all, safety mattered. To ensure that, he decided he would add a sheath. Meanwhile, a group of adventurers gathered in the street, their conversation carrying through the air. They spoke of troubling news, saying the quality of weapons supplied by the guild had dropped significantly. Concern spread among them, noting how dangerous it was since they risked their lives daily. Frustration grew, and they agreed the guild needed to step up its game. Away from that commotion, Sig knocked on the door and a lady opened it. She noticed the katana at his side and realized he was the blacksmith who had recently moved into the village. Sig introduced himself, and Cynthia, in turn, introduced herself as the mother of Liliana and Atra. Cynthia mentioned that she had heard he was making kitchen knives for her daughters, who were both very excited about it. Sig explained that he had already finished them. Liliana and Atra mistook Sig for a customer. Sig greeted them and they recognized him. He explained that he came to deliver their finished knives and asked if they would like to try them out. Liliana expressed that she would love to use them, and Atra raised her hands, saying she wanted to as well. Sig gave one knife to Atra and the other to Liliana. The two thanked him, and Liliana admired the craftsmanship, noting even the sheaths were amazing. Liliana and Atra opened the knives. Sig wondered why there was no reaction, and asked if they did not like the knives. Liliana explained that the blade was so beautiful she had been mesmerized. Sig acknowledged her words and was relieved. Cynthia remarked that she had never seen such a beautiful kitchen knife before. Atra expressed her desire to cut something, and Cynthia suggested she chop up some daikon radish. Atra was about to slice a radish when Sig warned her that she was using too much force, but it was already too late. She cut through the radish, and the chopping board was sliced as well. Cynthia noticed the cutting board was cut. Sig asked if Atra was hurt, and instructed her to use the weight of her hand to cut. Atra followed Sig's instruction and made a clean cut. Liliana said it was a clean cut. Sig said he had tried to restrain the sharpness and asked how it felt to use. Atra said it was wonderful and perfect, and Liliana agreed but asked how he had known without measuring. Sig explained that he had measured. Liliana asked when, and he replied that it was when they first greeted each other and shook hands. Liliana asked if it was just from that, and Sig explained that as a blacksmith he could tell not only the size and shape of the dominant hand, but also general body structure and muscle development from a handshake, something he had learned through experience. Liliana was amazed. Sig explained that based on that information, he simply made what was appropriate for the client. Liliana thanked him for the wonderful knives, and Atra also thanked him. Atra said she would treasure the knife. Sig thought that just being told it was good, right in front of him, was enough to save a craftsman's heart. Back in the guild, orders from clients were taken by another department and passed on to the workshop. Seeing the user's face showed how they wanted to use the blade and how it could be improved. This knife carried his feelings as its creator, his soul. That was why it had been fun for him. He had been able to do the same in Wings of Glory, but as their fame grew, the time spent facing the users decreased. Eventually, even making katanas was forbidden. He began taking orders from people he did not know and mass-producing to meet quotas. And before he realized it, his heart may have dried up. Liliana asked Sig if something was wrong, and he replied that he was just happy, saying there was nothing better than seeing a happy customer, as it was the ultimate satisfaction for a craftsman. Liliana, feeling shy, said there was something she would like him to make, and asked if she could make another request. Sig asked what it was. Liliana said she wanted an arrowhead, and Sig replied that she had mentioned being a hunter. She explained that her father had been skilled at it and had taught her, but after he passed away from an epidemic, she had been struggling to live up to him. It was not going well. Sig asked to see the bow and arrows she used, and said it would help if she could lend him one arrow as a sample. Liliana agreed and handed him the bow and arrow. Sig thanked her, examined the arrow, and called her name. When she responded, he asked if she would mind shooting once outside. In the woods, Liliana shot an arrow, and it struck the tree. Sig told her she was quite skilled, but Liliana replied that while she could hit the target, she was not strong enough to take down prey. Sig noted the earlier knife's exceptional sharpness, how it penetrated with very little force, and suggested applying the same approach to the arrowhead. Liliana asked if he could make it lighter without losing penetration power. Sig said he understood and would start right away, telling her he would come back around noon. Liliana thanked him warmly. At the workshop, Sig began making the arrowhead, thinking about increasing its penetration power while maintaining durability. He said this was where he could show his skills. He then attached the arrowhead to the shaft, securing it firmly with a final strike. Sig said the arrowhead had turned out well, then stepped outside. He felt the cool breeze blending with nature after leaving the hot workshop, cooling off from the sauna-like climate, and thought it was luxurious. Suddenly he felt chilled and sneezed. Realizing he should be careful not to cool off too much, Sig went to Liliana's house. Inside, Liliana admired the arrowhead, calling it beautiful. Sig told her he had made it a bit lighter, and she agreed, noting it was lighter than the previous one. Sig then said they just needed to see if it had not lost its penetration power. Sig said he had attached one to an arrow, and told her to try shooting it at the tree in the backyard. Liliana used the arrow, aimed at the tree, and upon release, it pierced through the tree and struck the one behind it. Liliana was shocked and exclaimed that it had pierced all the way through to the tree in the back. Sig then asked what she thought. Liliana told Sig it was incredible, but he laughed and said it was nothing special, as all his colleagues should be able to make something like that. Liliana then asked if there were many people like him in the city, and added that everyone in the village would be surprised. Sig mentioned that Beres had told him the blacksmith there was elderly, and Liliana confirmed it. Sig then said that once he got settled, he would start taking requests. Meanwhile, at the town square, Sig thought that he had not even set up a blacksmithing space yet, but people were already gathering around. He noted that Beres had spread the word around town, but wondered if their enthusiasm was a bit too much. He remembered Beres suggesting that he go to the central square with his blacksmithing tools like in the old days, since he did not like being disturbed while working. Sig had agreed that it would be better. Beres said he would spread the word that a skilled katana blacksmith was coming to the central square. Sig asked him not to put too much pressure on him. At the town square, a boy asked if he was the skilled katana blacksmith the village chief had mentioned. Sig replied that he did not know if he was skilled, but he was the one who had been asked, and he could do anything, from repairing and sharpening farm tools to general metalwork. The boy remarked that Sig looked a bit spaced out, and admitted he was somewhat worried about leaving it to him, but then handed him the axe. Sig asked if he was a woodcutter, but the boy wondered if the axe might have belonged to his father. Sig replied that he could tell by looking at his body. The man acknowledged his sharp eye and agreed to let him sharpen it, calling him Old Man. Sig thanked him and asked if 30 silver coins would be okay. The boy said that if he was not satisfied, he would haggle. Sig replied that it was fine. Sig took something out of his magic bag. The boy asked what it was, and Sig explained that they were sharpening tools, warning it might be a bit noisy. He then began sharpening the axe. The boy, watching, asked if it was really okay to sharpen it so intensely. Sig replied that the blade was thick enough that shaving off a bit would not be a problem. He thought that everyone had an eye for evaluating a blacksmith who had drifted to the countryside, so he would just focus on the sharpening before him. Sig handed the axe over and said it was done, asking how it was. The boy looked at the axe in amazement, jumped with joy, and exclaimed that his axe had become so beautiful. He tried it out and was surprised at how sharp it was. Sig smiled and asked if his skill was acknowledged now. The boy replied that no one there could see this and not be convinced. Then a man in the crowd asked if Sig could sharpen his axe too, and a lady requested that he sharpen her kitchen knife as well. Sig said he understood and asked everyone to form a line. He thought to himself that all these well-used and cherished tools made the work rewarding. Meanwhile, in the Wings of Glory building, the guildmaster welcomed the visitor, introducing himself as Schmidt, the guildmaster of Wings of Glory, and asked what brought her there that day. Lady Saya of the Lusarka Third Knight Order replied that she had heard the guild was excellent. The guildmaster said they were honored. Lady Saya then explained that there was someone she would like to meet. The guildmaster said that, as she mentioned, their S-rank guild was full of excellent adventurers, and then asked who she meant. Lady Saya replied that it was a blacksmith who could forge katanas, named Sig. Lady Saya said that ever since that day, every time she swung her sword, her craving grew. The great sword that had broken her weapon had cut in half with a single stroke, and she wanted a katana like that. She said that she had been wielding a sword since she was 6 years old, and had ingrained the kingdom's swordsmanship through hard work. She knew she shouldn't desire any weapon other than a sword, and yet, she couldn't suppress the urge to wield a katana, and had ended up coming here. The guildmaster said he was sorry, But Sig had left the guild about 2 weeks ago, and added that the guild still had blacksmiths even more skilled than Sig, who could create items beyond her expectations, even niche items like katanas. Lady Saya refused, saying that was fine. The guild master said that even he could tell there weren't many blacksmiths with that level of skill, and that Sig seemed to have an extraordinary love for katanas. Lady Saya asked if there were really any blacksmiths who could make katanas better than Sig, and left. The guild master, looking angry, kicked the table and said that the effectiveness of a weapon depended on its user, not just on the blacksmith, adding that none of them were truly obsessed over katanas. Meanwhile, at Sig's workshop, he placed metal in the furnace and said that now it was here, created by the different cooling speeds depending on the clay used. All this produced the sound of the blade contracting, the first cry of the sword. Sig said it was an elegant expression as he held and examined the katana. He then began sharpening it, noting that it was almost there and should turn out well, and that the time he had spent polishing with rough, medium, and finishing whetstones brought out a beautiful wave pattern. Sig thought that it had been 2 years since he had been able to spend time crafting a katana like this. He had leveled up during his days at the guild, but he was still far from his father's level. He remembered the time when he first saw a katana and drew it. It had been very beautiful, making him sweat, and it had felt as if there were a lot of flowers surrounding him. He wondered how his father had reached that level, and realized that this was why he couldn't quit making katanas. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Sig sat in the bathtub and said that the dirt and fatigue were dissolving in the bath. He noted that this house was rare in the village for having a proper bath. At the guild, they had just rinsed off with water, always chasing quotas, and he had never been able to truly relax his mind or body. 1 hour earlier, Liliana exclaimed that Sig was covered in black from head to toe. Sig apologized, explaining that he had been holed up in the workshop for about 5 days. Liliana then offered him a share of their hunt. Sig asked if it was rock boar meat. Liliana confirmed, saying they had been able to take it down thanks to his arrowheads. Sig replied that he was glad they had been useful, and thanked her. At the present, Sig thought that now that his heart was satisfied, it was time for food. He admired the meat, deciding to make holes and rub in salt and pepper. He planned to let it sit for 3 days, knowing that patience here would lead to an exquisite taste. Liliana greeted Sig, saying good morning. Sig asked if she was heading out to hunt, and Liliana confirmed, noting that it was the first time she had seen him in hunting gear. Sig agreed and added that it suited her well. Liliana asked how the meat was. Sig replied that he hadn't eaten it yet. Liliana exclaimed in surprise, and Sig reassured her that he had salt-cured it. Liliana asked if he was making it into preserved food, and Sig said no, he was going to smoke it. Liliana pointed out that smoking it would still make it preserved food. Sig explained that smoked meat was delicious and complex, with the flavor changing depending on the chips and temperature. Liliana said she understood. Sig then said he was going to start smoking it and asked if she wanted to watch. Liliana asked what the big box was. Sig explained that it was a large smoker he had made, and that after lighting the hickory chips, they would hang the meat that had been dried inside. Liliana commented that it smelled so good. Sig agreed, saying that hickory had a mild flavor and gave a nice color, and told her to come back in 5 hours, which Liliana acknowledged. 5 hours later, Liliana grew tired of waiting, and Sig agreed to open the smoker. Liliana noticed that the meat had turned a beautiful brown color, glossy and looking delicious. Sig explained that they would be able to eat it after drying it for 2 more days. Liliana reacted with surprise. 2 days later, Sig went to Liliana's house and announced that the meat was ready. Liliana, excited, asked if they could finally eat it. Sig said that he wanted to share it with everyone and asked where Cynthia was. Atra replied that she was helping out in someone else's field. Sig acknowledged this. Liliana suggested that they eat it, just the 3 of them, and promised to bring some back for her mother, saying she couldn't wait any longer. Sig thought that she seemed really excited and saw it as his chance to create another smoked meat enthusiast. He agreed to eat it, just the 3 of them. Liliana remarked on the refined, smoky aroma, and Atra noted that it was brown and firm. Sig commented that it looked delicious. Sig explained that the meat was already seasoned, so without any extra preparation, they could simply cook it and have smoked rock boar belly steak. Liliana commented on the wonderful smell, and Atra said it looked very tasty. At the table, they all said it was time to eat. The smokiness of the hickory blended with the aroma of the meat, creating a blissful experience. Sig took a bite and thought it was delicious. The aroma filled his nose, and a rich, deep flavor spread throughout his mouth. The sweet fat and deeply flavored lean meat of the rock boar melted together on his tongue, with the wild, meaty juices overflowing with each bite. Atra and Liliana took a bite and said it was so good. Delicious. Crispy on the outside, juicy and tender on the inside. They remarked that Sig had outdone himself with this. Liliana was amazed that she couldn't believe it was the same meat, noting that smoking had made it much more delicious. Sig pointed out that it wasn't just preserved. Liliana took another bite and said she couldn't stop eating, while Sig simply watched the two sisters happily enjoying their meal. They continued eating, and Sig thought that after working day and night, exhausted, pairing smoked meat with alcohol had certainly been delicious, but this was already irresistible. Then Liliana asked for more, and Sig said he would grill some more. Liliana asked Sig, who had been blacksmithing since arriving in the village, what he planned to do with the things he made. Sig admitted that, to be honest, he hadn't thought about what would come after. He had been satisfied just being able to forge katanas. But now that he had left the guild, he was curious about how they would be evaluated. Though there was no one in the village who used a katana, Liliana suggested that, in that case, Sig come with them to Umbert, where they regularly sold produce at the market. Adding that they could likely sell his smoked meat there as well, Sig asked if Umbert wasn't a small town. Liliana explained that it had changed a lot since the old days, and was now the most bustling town in the area. Sig thought about it and realized he hadn't been there in about 15 years. Liliana said they were planning to leave the village in 2 days and invited Sig to join them. Sig thought that making and selling things he liked, if successful, might allow him to continue his ideal lifestyle. He then agreed, saying he would be in their care. Liliana asked if Sig would be all right since there were monsters along the way. Sig replied that it would be no problem. Atra asked if she could get her hopes up. Sig laughed and said that he could handle himself well enough, but cautioned them not to rely on him too much, reminding them that he was just a katana blacksmith after all. Liliana thanked Sig, explaining that they often had to turn back because of monsters, which made the vegetables unsellable, and that just having him with them was reassuring. Atra raised her hands and said she would let their mother know too. Sig replied, "All right." 2 days later, Sig greeted everyone in the morning. Cynthia responded, and Liliana noticed his luggage was missing and asked about it. Sig pointed to his pocket to indicate it was right there. Liliana exclaimed in surprise at his magic bag. Sig pointed to the cart and said he could carry it too. He then placed it into his magic bag and asked if they should go, noting that it had been so long since visiting Umbert. Liliana remarked that their journey with the cart had turned into a picnic. Monsters are waiting on their path. Will their journey really be comfortable? Find out in the next episode. The manga link is in the description. Thank you for watching, guys.